Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Michelle Cook and I will be the moderator for today's presentation. A copy of the slides from today's presentation will not be made available electronically. However, the presentation will be recorded and archived for later reference. Today's webinar topic is use of service animals by persons with disabilities in the National Park System and is being presented by Ray Bloomer. Ray has been with the National Park Service for 44 years. Over the course of his tenure with the NPS, Ray has served in various roles at the park, region, and national levels. In 1992, Ray became an accessibility specialist with the Accessibility Management Program, PFMD, duty stationed at the National Center on Accessibility. As an employee of the National Park Service at NCA, Ray Bloomer is the Director of Education and Technical Assistance. He provides a wealth of expertise on a wide range of accessibility issues, from the design process to interpretive programs, publications, exhibits, and facilities, including outdoor areas and historic preservation. His expertise addresses both physical and programmatic accessibility, and he is considered a national expert in disability legislation and regulations with particular emphasis on program accessibility. The objectives for today's training are: discuss the legal definition of a service animal, discuss the NPS policy for use of service animals at park units, identify the criteria for service animal training, tasks, and identification, discuss appropriate interactions with persons bringing animals into parks, and identify circumstances where service animals may be removed or denied access. It is now my pleasure to turn the presentation over to Ray Bloomer.
Thank you, Michelle, and good day to all of you, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. It is on the use of service animals by persons with disabilities throughout the National Park System. It is being provided by the Washington Accessibility Support Program. What I want to talk about initially is the policy that was signed by the acting director of the National Park Service, October of 2018. It was a pretty long-awaited policy, and it essentially identifies the National Park Service policy on the use of service animals throughout the National Park Service. It provides insurance of compliance with Section 504. It is consistent with the Department of Justice service animal regulations that have been provided, and it means that people using service animals in the National Park Service will have consistent policy with areas outside of the National Park Service. When people go to state parks, local parks, grocery stores, anything like that. It is also aligned very closely with Director's Order 42, ensure that people with disabilities can participate in programs and go into and through facilities, and that they'll be accessible to and usable by people with disabilities. I want to identify what is a service animal. A service animal, by definition, is a dog that is individually trained to do work or perform tasks for the benefit of an individual with a disability, including sensory, physical, psychiatric, or any other type of disability. Key points. Number one, it is a dog that is individually trained to perform tasks. It is for the benefit of an individual with a disability, and it does not make any difference no matter what that disability is. Now, we identified the definition of a service animal, that it is a dog. However, it can also be, in the rare instances where miniature horses have also been trained to serve as service animals. We need to make sure that we modify policies, practices, and procedures of our policies in order to allow a miniature horse to be used as a service animal. However, the miniature horse has to be, number one, individually trained for the purpose of providing services for an individual with a disability. couple of reasons why people do use miniature horses rather than a service animal. One is allergies. There are some people that have allergies to dogs that do not have allergies to horses. Some people have a fear of dogs, or a member of a person's family, or it could be religious reasons. Another strong reason, especially in rural areas where it's more convenient to have a miniature horse, and that is the longevity of the working life of the service animal. A miniature horse is has a 3 to 4 time longer working life than most service dogs will. Some of the tasks that people would use a miniature horse for over a dog are things such as guiding, stability, and in many instances, the strength of the horse may be critical to the need of an individual. Again, I did mention that I said that they're rare, they're not very common, and you're more likely to find them in rural areas rather than in suburban areas. I want to talk a little bit about the training of service animals. First of all, there are many different professional organizations that do provide training for individuals with disabilities. However, professional training is not required. Individuals can train their own service animal. Even though an individual, or even though many people will have their dogs professionally trained, or they'll be acquired through a professional training organization, sometimes that you'll find that an individual's needs for a service animal may be minimal, and yet those minimal needs are extremely important to that individual. For example, I'm aware of an example that I received once regarding an individual, an older woman that had both hips and both knees replaced. She trained a large dog to be able to provide her assistance in doing a few tasks that she's not able to do herself very easily. One is to get up from a seated position. The dog will pull her forward and it'll remain in a standing position, rigid, while she maintains her balance. And then she also is unable to reach down to pick something up from the ground. And the dog will pick things up and put them in her hand. It really did not take a great deal of training for the dog to be able to do that. She was able to self-train that dog to do those minimally, but very, very important tasks for her. Service animals in training is not considered a service animal until it is trained and performing the tasks necessary by an individual with a disability. However, many parks do allow individuals to come into a park to train their service animal so that they know that when it's providing service for an individual with a disability, it will be able to behave in a park in an appropriate way. However, it's not a requirement, but I do want to say that there are several states that already have, as part of state law, that service animals are allowed, service animals in training can go into places where pedestrians can go, and obviously where service animals will be able to go themselves. So the recommendation under those circumstances would be find out what the state laws are and try to do something that is consistent within those areas. Again, it's not a requirement, but it would be very beneficial if there's an expectation within that particular state. I want to begin to address some of the tasks that are performed by service animals. Number one, these tasks are going to vary very, very widely, and it must be directly related to the individual's particular needs. Some of the ones that are most commonly seen over time that we're familiar with is guide dogs for individuals that are blind, navigating in an environment for the most part is what people who are blind will need their dog to do. And also dogs that are trained to alert for people who are deaf or people that have hearing loss, to alert them as to a variety of different types of sounds. Such it's the presence of people that may be behind an individual, or sounds, the direction of someone that might be speaking, horns, or various other types of signals. And they're also trained to notify the urgency of the sounds that they hear. For example, Judy Kessler, who works in the Alaska Regional Office, has hearing loss, and her service dog, Rasta. And here's an example of what happens when Rasta hears the smoke alarm in the house. Rasta immediately goes and jumps up at Judy, and then to signal urgency to that sound, she lays down, then gets up and guides Judy out of the house. So it's important when we talk about the urgency of the sound to know that there's a difference between a timer or a fire alarm. We know there's a big difference between my eggs are done versus my house is on fire. Other tasks that service animals might perform: pulling or pushing a wheelchair, alerting an individual to the presence of allergens, or the fact that a person may be about to have a seizure. We need to, the dog will also might alert a child or an individual that their blood sugar is dropping and that they need to change their, or take their medication rather. And that's one of the reasons why, and I really do want to point this out, it's one of the reasons why you'll often see service animals either being carried by an individual, and quite frequently they'll be small dogs, or that they'll be in a front pack rather than on the ground. The misnomer that all service animals have to be on the ground in order to perform their tasks, this is a perfect example of why that's not so. They need to be close enough to be able to smell a person's breath. A dog may be trained to alert a person that it's time to take medication due to something like depression. Helping people with various types of neurological disabilities may be because they may prevent or interrupt certain types of behavior, such as an individual here that has narcolepsy, and it is to prevent the person from sliding out of the chair if that person were to fall asleep. Oftentimes it provides assistance with psychiatric or neurological disabilities, such as providing assistance for children with autism. Other examples would be things such as individuals with PTSD, where a person who may not be very comfortable around a crowd, if they started off in an area where there were not, where many people were not present, and then people started to come towards them, frequently the dog will recognize that this is a circumstance that may cause the person a lot of anxiety, and the dog will put themselves between the person with PTSD and the crowds. Oftentimes they may just do something such as go up to the person, and it'll help the person to calm down if they happen to becoming very anxious under those circumstances. Another component of service animals and what they, a task that they perform, is to perform what is referred to as intelligent disobedience. And that would be something like, a really good example is a blind person getting ready to cross the street, and the service animal sees a car coming. Even though they were signaled to go forward, they realize it's not the safe situation, and they will prevent the person from going forward simply by standing in place. A person with PTSD that may not be very comfortable going into an area that there is something ahead that they know they're uncomfortable with. The dog will prevent the person from going forward under those circumstances. Other tasks that service animals do would be retrieving items. Sometimes they'll provide physical support for individuals with disabilities. And this is one reason why dogs are very carefully matched with their handlers or the individual with a disability. For example, people who are blind, because of the height of where the harness needs to be for the person who is blind, a smaller dog will be matched with someone that may be 5 foot tall, as opposed to a larger dog for someone that may be 6'6", because a person needs to have the handle of the harness at a comfortable position when they reach down to best have the dog perform the tasks that are necessary. There's also for dogs that are using the dog for stability. Again, you want to make sure that if you have a larger person, that you have a larger, stronger dog that can hold its position when a person needs to stabilize themselves or get up from a seated to a standing position. Some of the other physical tasks that a dog may do. Here's my favorite, and that's where you see this yellow lab inserting an ATM card into the machine. I imagine this dog at home sleeping on a bed of 20s on a pretty regular basis. You could also see here where the dog are carrying a bag of groceries and a dog pushing elevator buttons or an emergency button. Non-qualifying work is also important to be aware of. And there are things such as crime deterrent, emotional support, companionship. These are the things that do not fall in under the definition or fit the criteria of a service animal. So, for example, a dog for personal protection does not fit the definition of a dog that is trained to perform tasks based on a disability. They're not guard dogs. So here's the million-dollar question that everyone wants to ask. So I'm going to ask it for you. Is an emotional support animal a service animal? The answer is no. It is not trained to perform a task. It is not protected by regulations or policy, but it does provide a function. It's just not trained to take a specific action based on a circumstance. It does provide a function because just by being with an individual with a disability, it may help that individual to calm down. It may help that individual or keep that individual from going into an agitated state. It's just not trained to take action. An example with PTSD. The person has a disability, and the animal may keep that person from going into an agitated state. So there are several key points that I think it's important for us to consider. There's actually 5 of them that I want to point out. Number 1, focus on the behavior of the animal. If it is not a service animal, and it is an emotional support animal, and it is behaving in every way that you would expect a service animal to behave, then consider that. What would be the alternative? Number two, what would be the alternative if you remove that person from their emotional support animal? What would be the outcome? Three, is a happy quality visitor experience what the National Park Service is all about? Four, if the veteran were denied the use of his or her emotional support animal, would the National Park Service be able to pass the red face test if that ended up in the newspaper? And number five, if you don't have a good reason to remove an emotional support animal, why do it? Identifying service animals is important. It's pretty important. And it's also very easy because, number one, you can ask a person, is that a service animal? Is it required because of a disability? And the second question is, what tasks has the animal been trained to do? They're the only two questions that can be asked. Not every situation is obvious as far as service animals. Typically, when you see someone who is blind using a guide dog, it is very obvious. If a person is being pulled by a service animal and they happen to be a wheelchair user, again, very, very obvious. But in those circumstances where it may not be obvious, that's something where it may not be, it may be appropriate to ask the question if it's a park that does not allow pets and you need to let a person know that pets are not allowed. If the person says it's a service animal and the dog is behaving, you really don't have a good reason to ask any further questions. If you have a concern, then you can go ahead and ask those questions if it's necessary. But again, we really emphasize focus on the behavior of the dog. Don't ask questions just to satisfy curiosity. For example, here's a picture of Rosie. Rosie is a service animal for Wendy Davis, who is a superintendent in one of our national parks. And Rosie is there to provide support in recognizing and providing support as a seizure alert dog. And you wouldn't want to end up grilling what possibly could be your future superintendent. You don't want to ask a person about the nature of their disability or the extent of that disability. The questions are simply limited to what tasks is the dog trained to perform. You cannot require a person to show any type of medical documentation or any other type of proof of disability. And this is really important. You cannot require a person to provide any type of certification for the service animal or ask an individual to demonstrate the type of tasks that they do. For example, you wouldn't want to ask a person who has a seizure disorder to have their dog demonstrate what tasks it may perform. You also cannot require, in any NPS settings, require a person to have a permit in order to bring their service animal into a national park unit. I'm going to recommend that if any parks have on their website any type of restrictions, because that information was put on prior to October of 2018, I recommend that you go back and examine your policy and make sure that your policy is consistent with current NPS policy as it relates to service animals. You cannot require that a person using a service animal wear any type of vests, capes, harnesses. There is no requirement for that. It's the preference of the handler, the person with a disability that has the service animal. Where can a service animal be used? Anywhere where anywhere where visitors are allowed, anywhere where pedestrians can go, an individual using a service animal can go into those areas. One issue that I think is important for us to consider in National Park Service settings, and it's a question that comes up fairly frequently, and that is, and I'm going to talk about something that occurs at Joshua Tree, because Joshua Tree is a desert environment. We have a lot of parks that have similar environments. Is it safe for both the handler and the service animal? For example, surface temperatures could be extremely hot for a service animal. You also need to make sure that additional water is provided. So we want to make sure that if the dog has to have some type of booties to protect its paws, that information should be available on websites and other publications, and when a person arrives at the park, so that they can take the precautions, bring additional amounts of water that may be necessary. It's really important that we inform rather than restrict individuals with disabilities, because again, the service animal can go anywhere a pedestrian can go, but we want to make sure that that is done in a safe way. Service animals must be harnessed, leashed, and or tethered, unless any of those devices may interfere with the tasks that the dog is trained or needs to perform. So here's an example: a service animal that may need to go to a certain area, such as a phone, to let the person know that the phone is ringing. Oftentimes, people with PTSD may have a service animal that will go into an area that a person is unable to see, such as a historic outbuilding that may be dark. A service animal will go into that area, come back, and let their handler know that it is safe. Or the example here, where you've got a snowy path and it goes around the bend and the person cannot see around that bend. They want to be able to know that it is safe before they physically go there. The dog will go around the bend, come back, and let their handler know it is safe to go down that area. Those tasks need to be done off a leash. However, after the task has been performed, the dog goes back, returns to the person, and stays with them. Any dog that is off the leash because of a variety of reasons, including the possibility that a person that may not have stability could be pulled over as a result of the being connected with a leash, the dog still has to be under control of the handler by either voice signals or some type of hand signal. But again, the important thing is it must always be under control. The dog cannot be running around when it's not performing the task. It has to remain with the individual and under control. Control does not necessarily mean just because it's attached to a leash. You may have leashes that could be quite long, and that may not relate to the task that a person may have trained their dog, or the dog may be trained to do. The dog has to remain near the individual. Can you remove or deny a service animal? And the answer is yes, because a service animal cannot be out of control and disrupting a program or other visitors. So, for example, the animal has to be under control, or the handler must be able to bring the animal back under control if for any reason that occurred. If that happens, if the animal's not under control, it's not housebroken, it's disturbing a program, then that dog can be removed. If it's growling, it's snarling, it's barking, it's running around, it's threatening other visitors or other dogs. You always want to give the person the opportunity to bring their dog under control. However, if that does not happen, the dog can be removed from the program, but we still must make sure that we enable the individual with the disability to remain in the program or get the benefit of whatever opportunity is available to visitors. Are there limitations on the use of a service animal within a park? If having the service animal changes the fundamental nature of a program, then in that particular area, not in the entire park, but in that particular area, a person may be denied the use of the service animal in that area. Or if it raises some type of legitimate safety issue. One example, if you have an area such as, here's an example of breeding grounds for piping plovers, and a dog obviously would be frightening those birds. It would disrupt that particular program. So only in that area and only during the times of the year when breeding takes place, it would disrupt the fundamental nature of that program, and therefore a person can be restricted from bringing animals into that area, service animals into that area. I want to go over a couple of frequently asked questions that come up in many of our national parks. If you have staff members or visitors that have a fear of an animal or an allergy, can you refuse service in that area because of an allergy or fear of a dog? This is one where the service animal handler, because they are an individual with a disability, their rights come first. And most of the time, accommodations can be made. This is something that I would recommend that people think about in advance, so that you think of things such as a person going into a theater and someone says there's this animal there and I'm allergic. Make arrangements so that one of those two people sit in the front left, somebody else sits in the back right. The same thing with any type of an area. Most of the time, we've had very few instances where these circumstances can't be easily worked out. If it happens to be on a walk or a tour, to have one person in the beginning of the tour and the person who is allergic towards the back of the tour. Are restaurants or other bars, any other area where food is served, does the dog have to be allowed to sit at the table or even be fed at the table? And the answer is no. Service animals have to remain on the floor unless in the rare instances where a dog needs to be near the person's face and they still cannot be fed at the table. A service animal cannot be denied access to places where food is served, such as a salad bar, and under those circumstances, or a buffet. Under those circumstances, again, the dog does have to remain on the floor. Can a hotel or a lodge limit the rooms that a person using a service animal can be offered? And again, the answer there is no. People with disabilities that use service animals have to be able to access the various types of rooms that are offered, such as a suite, room with a view. They can't be restricted only to the rooms where pets are traditionally given in places that are pet friendly. Person with a disability has to be able to go with their service animal in all of the types of rooms that are offered. It also means that a person who uses a service animal cannot be charged extra because they have a service animal, just because something like somebody may need to do a little bit of extra cleaning because of dog hairs in that room. However, a person with a service animal would be responsible for any damage that it would be considered out of the ordinary as a result of them using a room. Now, the use of a service animal, and I do want to bring this up, the use of a service animal is a civil right. However, many people with disabilities, because they have been challenged in so many circumstances, people with disabilities quite frequently have become rather defensive when interacting with people because of their service animal. I would like you to consider this scenario. A person decides they're going to come to a national park. On the way, they stop by a local fast food restaurant. As they walk in, they're told, can't bring a pet in here. And the person says, no, that's my service animal. And right away, they know I can ask you the two questions, so they have to answer those two. After they leave, on the way, they remember they have to pick up some type of an electronic for their technology. And when they go into the department store, the greeter says, you can't have a pet in here. They say, no, that's my service animal. Again, here goes the two questions. On the way back to the electronics department, they encounter another employee who also brings up the issue along with the person at the electronics area of the department store. By the time the person has come to the national park, they're feeling a little bit defensive, so that when they see that uniformed ranger, possibly a law enforcement person with their equipment on their belt, and possibly a stern look on their face, that person is rather defensive. We can turn that scenario from a defensive, negative circumstance to a very positive encounter simply by something that we, the National Park Service, are famous for, and that's that smile. Think of a person looking at that ranger looking at that dog and say, wow, that's a nice looking dog. My mother has a dog very similar to that. And the person says, yeah, it's my service animal. If it's not necessary to ask any further questions, don't. And you might also say, hey, if you don't mind, I'm going to let some of the other rangers know that I've had this encounter with someone that's got a nice yellow lab, a person wearing a red jacket and blue pants, so that they don't have to ask you those same kinds of questions. We have now created a very positive experience out of what could have been a very negative experience that a person has. People that use service animals use that service animal because it creates a high degree of independence, and they may not have had that independent experience without the use of a service animal. It's really important that we enable that person to experience our park in a friendly, welcoming way. Keep in mind, one thing that we have in common with National Park Service and service animals is the word service. And we now open the webinar up to questions. Michelle?
Right, thank you so much, Ray. The question and answer sections of the webinars presented in May of 2020 have been recorded in a supplemental download document available on the NPS Common Learning Portal. questions related to the differences between emotional support animals and service animals, behavior and tasks performed by service animals, potential threats to natural resources and exhibit areas, wildlife encounters, and other webinar content reinforcement questions are contained in the supplemental Q&A document. The NPS policy memorandum and FAQs on service animals are also available for download in the same location. I will turn it back over to Ray for some concluding remarks.
Thank you, Michelle. And I want to thank all of you for taking the time to participate in this webinar, and also on behalf of all of our visitors with disabilities who will benefit by the time that you have taken to join us today. Thank you very much.